So when we were talking about tonight, I thought it would be a nice thing to share uh, large parts, maybe all, of a conference talk that I gave about a year and a half ago. Um, the conference series is called "The Inspiration of Astronomical Phenomena," and I gave a talk about the Pleiades. And essentially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to center on just the Pleiades, one object in the sky, and give you a sense for the breadth and depth of um, different ways that the star cluster inspired Arabic poetry and prose. Uh, Again, just for one object in the sky. And it is the most renowned object in the Arabian sky. But it it's a nice perspective because um, we all come to dark skies for different reasons, and there are different motivations we have. Um, and for me, I'm a cultural astronomer. It is the human connection to the night sky that really gets me, and it's important for many cultures around the world, even today. And we are risking losing that as the world brightens its skies. Um, Cultures lose that opportunity to point out to the next generation the stars, and especially the faint stars. So that's what I'll talk about tonight. So let me share my screen here. So the star, whoops, of Arabia. And uh, at the time when I was giving this talk at the conference, it just so happened that Soho was aiming at the sun with the Pleiades directly behind and above it. So we got that nice image of the Pleiades here. So right next to the sun. Okay, so this is what we're gonna do for the next 3 hours. Hope you've got your lattes in hand, and no, it won't be that long. So okay, so here we are at 35 degrees north. You all know the principle that around the world at the same latitude we have the same sky. We just get to it at different points in the day. And so my place of study is here in the Arabian Peninsula. And it really has quite a range of variations. At the bottom, near Sana'a, Yemen, you've got a latitude of 12.8 degrees north. And then at the top, beyond the peninsula to the area of Syria and Iraq, you've got 38.1 degrees north or so. And so that's a 26-degree range. That's really quite a lot north to south. And it's interesting, in some of the poetry, I've done some investigations where you can actually figure out where they wrote the poem, or where they imagined the setting of the poem to be based on the relationships between different stars in the sky, because that 26-degree difference is huge. So I'll skip through this quickly. You all know, I think probably, typically say Arab to reference the people, Arabic to talk about the language. I talk about Arabian astronomy. Arabian references the region. And so it's the astronomy that has come out of this region. And it's indigenous Arabian as a cultural astronomy rather than Islamic astronomy. Islamic astronomy developed later and typically uses Greek pictures of the sky as opposed to Arabian cultural pictures. but it's more complex and interesting as you go through. Here are the primary sources that I use, going back to 500 CE with the earliest surviving poetry that references the stars in Arabic, and several different major historical sources later in the 1st century. So that's where all the data comes from. You all on this call know the Pleiades. So there they are, gorgeous star cluster. The proper name for the Pleiades in Arabic, is Thuraya. And this writer, Ibn Qutayba, describes them as 6 conspicuous stars in whose gap are many faint stars. By the numbers, it's possible to see up to 15 stars in the Pleiades star cluster if you have pristine skies and excellent vision. Thuraya comes from words tharawa, which means abundance, and maybe also tharan, which means moisture. And Thuraya itself is a diminutive, so I would translate it as the little abundant one. And a poet who died in 735 talked about the appearance of the Pleiades. He said, "She raises them aloft in the ostrich nest, her eggs in a wasteland, just as the star of Thuraya emerges between the clouds." So nice picture, imagining the stars to be those bright, huge white eggs in the ostrich nest. And interesting, he says the star of Thuraya, in Arabic that is Nejm Thuraya, and Nejm means star or asterism in Arabic. And so this star cluster was so renowned that over time, anytime you said the star without any other qualification, it was clear that you meant the Pleiades, Thuraya. And we see that throughout many hundreds of years of poetry up to the modern day. And so that's called Antonomasia, where you substitute the star for the Pleiades. And this historian, Ibn Qutayba, again, directly addresses that. He says, when you hear them mentioning the star without attributing anything to it, know that they mean a Thuraya. So we have this clear connection. This is the star par excellence for Arabian astronomy. A third name it had was the fatty tail of the lamb. And that is because there was an asterism that was the lamb. And it's a lot like Aries, Greek Aries, except it has the addition of a Thuraya. So the 2 bright stars in Aries are the 2 horns of the lamb. And then you have a group of 3 stars that formed the little belly of the lamb. And then the Pleiades was the fatty tail of the lamb. Interestingly, Al-Biruni, a Persian astronomer in the earliest part of the 2nd millennium, he, in his book, really railed against Arabian astronomy for daring to imagine the fatty tail of the lamb being represented by the Pleiades, when, of course, the Pleiades was in Taurus the bull. How dare you imagine some other asterism for it? So I don't like Biruni very much as a result of that. Yeah, he was pretty aggressive against Arabian astronomy. Okay, so now I want to talk for a moment. This sets the stage for what comes next. There are 6 circumstances where you have enough visual information to use the position of a star at a certain time of the year or at a certain time of night to predict the other piece of the equation, the time of year. So if you imagine a star rising above the horizon, that's really easy to identify. It comes up above the mountain or a flat horizon or an ocean, or it sets into the horizon. So you know when that's happening. Culmination is when a star gets as high as it can get, which is often due south or due north. Now, the way that we perceive the night sky is more like a flat-bottomed bowl than a sphere or a dome. And it's just how our brains are wired. So when things culminate at the zenith, it gets a bit fuzzy there. There's a lot of area that we attribute to the zenith that isn't quite zenith, in other words. But it'll get you close enough. And so if you imagine a star can rise, it can be at the top of the sky, or it can set. And then you can make those observations when the sun is about to rise in the morning, or just after it has set in the evening. And put these together, and this gives you 6 different circumstances for the apparition of a particular star. Well, for a Thuraya, the Pleiades, you have all 6 of these circumstances being represented in poetry, which is amazing. And you can track them through the year. So we'll go together through a year of the Pleiades. And so we're going to start with the heliacal rising in the morning, just ahead of the sun. That about 1,200 years ago would have happened in mid to late May. Due to the precession of the equinoxes, these dates are about 3 weeks later for us today. And then the dawn culmination in the middle of the summer, or later part of the summer, rather, mid-August. And then the cosmical setting in early November. This is all in the morning. But as the Pleiades is having its setting just before sunrise, it's essentially opposite the sun. And so if you switch over to the evening sky, just before that morning setting, as the sun rises, you get the evening first rising of the Pleiades in late October, just a couple weeks before the cosmical setting. Then you get culmination the evening in late January. This is about where we are, but remember, it would be 3 weeks later today, so it would be about early to mid-February. And then you get it setting at the end, or you get it setting into the west following the sun. And then, of course, between that early mid-April and mid-May, it's essentially disappeared behind the sun, or too close to the sun to be observed. So that's how it progresses through the whole year. So let's take a look at some of these. First off, the morning set, and we're going to start with the rising. In Arabic, there's this beautiful word called ghalas, which means, in one word, the darkness of the last part of the night when it becomes mixed with the light of the dawn as it spreads in the tracks of the horizon. So it means blackness mixed with whiteness and redness. One word, specific time. And in practice, I've found this to be in the neighborhood of 45 to 60 minutes before sunrise, depending on the time of the year and the angle of the sun as it goes into the horizon. So when the Pleiades is rising, it has a certain shape, and you see it here on the left. Ibn Qutayba, the historian, said when it rises, it welcomes the observer to it by its nose, because it's almost like a head or a face with a nose that's protruding out to the right. Another early writer talked about how the Arabs used to appoint stars for the summer and stars for the winter, and the Thuraya was the first of the stars of summer. And here again, he says, and it is the star. So we get that antonomasia again. So in Arabic literature, there is a genre called rhymed prose. And I'll read this to you in Arabic so you get the sense for how it sounds. It's a little bit like a nursery rhyme in how it sounds, but this form was used to communicate all kinds of information. And because it rhymed, it was easy to memorize. In fact, many titles of books were produced in rhymed prose, and you can still see that today. So in Arabic, this sounds like إذا طلع النجم فالسيف في حدم والعشب في حطم والأعنات في قدم. And you can hear that M sound at the end. So these are all my own translations, and there's a process, but I did my best to follow the rhymes as well at the end. So here it says, when rises the star, summer heat sets a vehement bar, and dried herbage breaks apart. And then some versions have the fourth line or fourth phrase that says, and herds of onagers with their front teeth spar. So then you digest this. Okay, and what happens is, okay, when rises the star, this is happening in mid to late May. It's already getting very hot, just as it does in Phoenix already in May. So summer heat is vehement. It is really hot. Dried herbage breaks apart, right? It's hot, and it's been hot for enough time that the plants are dried up on the ground. And then herds of onagers, or wild asses, with their front teeth spar. It's mating season for them, and they would run around and bite each other in the butt. They would bite the onagers ahead of them. And so this all happens in this period of time. So you get a little forecast when you see for the first time the Pleiades rising just ahead of sunrise in the morning. Then you know these things are happening. Here's another version. It says, when rises the star, meat is most protected by far, because it's hot and it spoils easily. Feared is when one feels below par. And on the hills, the midday mirage shimmers afar. So, of course, when it's very hot, you get mirages easily forming. And then we have poetry. This one says, she remained with him until the stem withered and became bent, and the morning twilight drove a thuraya in its sheets. I love the imagery there of the morning twilight in the sheets. And then we also have the sense of herbage being brittle and dried up. Here's one that talks about water. When the observer saw a thuraya in the commingling of light and darkness, there's that ghalas period in the early morning twilight, and the trickle of natural reservoirs actually sizzled. So we get this sense of those remaining waters boiling and drying up. So a thuraya, the Pleiades, is followed directly by a bright red star that we would know as Aldebaran, and that actually comes from the Arabic Aldebaran. So that survived as a whole word, and it means the follower, and it's the follower of the Pleiades, a thuraya. Sometimes it was called the follower of the star, different ways to say that. And so Aldebaran also has its own rhymed prose. When rises the follower, the rugged lands become vehemently hotter. Loathed is the fire. Flies are inflamed in a fluster. Brooks turn into vapor, and children throw themselves wherever. So this would be, 10 days or a couple weeks after the rising of the Pleiades itself. And here we can see in the morning sky, we've got a Thuraya in the blue circle. And then to the left, we've got a bright star here that rises with, or just before sometimes, a Thuraya. And that star is Capella. The Arabs know Capella as Al-Ayuk or Raqib Thuraya, which means the watcher of a Thuraya, because it rises at the same time. But the other name, Al-Ayuk, means the impeder. And there's a little love triangle with the follower and a Thuraya, where the follower is engaged to a Thuraya, and the impeder is trying to prevent them from getting together. And so forever, the follower chases his beloved across the sky, never quite getting to her, and the impeder is keeping them apart somehow. And then we have some other stars that are connected to the impeder. So here we've started with one asterism, a Thuraya, and then that took us through imagination and inspiration in the sky to Aldebaran, and then that took us to the impeder, and then that took us to these other elements, the foot of the impeder and the followers of the impeder, right? And so these stories build and grow. So we have poetry that talks about the impeder as well. Here it says, when the impeder and the star rise, their lead camels at night insert between the two sky raisers and the heart of the scorpion. So what's going on here? On the left, we have the morning, and on the right, we have the nighttime on the same day. So in the morning, we have a Thuraya and the impeder rising together. And so when that happens, the camel should aim between the two sky raisers and the heart of the scorpion. The two sky raisers are a pair of stars. The name Asimak is referring to a tent pole that holds up the canopy of the tent. And these two stars, you would recognize them as Arcturus and Spica. When they get to the highest point in the sky, they are on top of each other, almost at the meridian. And we have Arcturus quite close to the zenith, and they are holding up the sky from that perspective. And so they're the two sky raisers. The heart of the scorpion is Antares and Scorpius. And so this is pretty specific. If you aim your camel at this time of night in mid to late May between the two sky raisers, you're going to be driving them east-southeast, which is pretty accurate for nighttime navigation. Okay, so let's look at culmination as an example. Again, we're in Chelas, the same period of time, but now the Pleiades are at the top of the sky. And so here, this poet says, at the moment when the star had culminated in the waning morning darkness, that's our Chelas, when the herbage had ripened for harvest, some bent and some harvested already. So here we're in mid-August. It's harvest time, and we're in the latter part of the summer there. If we again return to our follower, one of its names was the urger of the star, like it's driving the Pleiades ahead of it. And this gets us to this beautiful piece of poetry here. So this poet, who died in 735, Vororoma, said, I arrived haphazardly when a Thuraya high overhead was like an aquatic bird soaring, her follower flying in her tracks, yet neither falling behind nor overtaking her, with 20 small stars, as if they, and he in the sky if he could speak, were camels that he led riding widespread, riding camels that were about to scatter away from him, both connected and dispersed, and one urging drives them to the water from the heart of the spacious desert on their first night of travel. So descriptive. But looking at this from a dark skies context, look what's going on. We have, as the Pleiades goes from rising to then being overhead, its aspect has changed. We interact with it differently, and we perceive a different up-down relationship with the stars and the Pleiades. So here he is imagining the star cluster to be an aquatic bird soaring, okay? But then he's also identifying 20 small stars in the Hyades cluster, that V-shaped cluster connected to Aldebaran. So these are faint stars requiring dark skies. And he's identifying these as riding camels that are spread wide. And as you look at the Hyades cluster, that little V-shaped asterism in the upper left corner here, you see that they are widespread, especially the brighter stars. So they're using these fine details in what they see in the night sky to be inspiration for the poetry. It's beautiful. And there are other names used for the Hyades cluster. Sometimes Aldebaran itself was called the stallion camel, and so the Hyades cluster stars were the young camels, or sometimes the flock of sheep or goats, or the flock of little sheep or goats. Very various names there. Okay, so now let's look at setting. And here we again return to Hellas, and setting was really important. It turns out that in the literature that remains, rising stars typically had prominence in the rhymed prose, and setting stars were more prominent in the poetry. It's an interesting relationship. So here, this is really old. This poet, Imru al-Qais, died in 544, so almost 1,500 years ago. And he said, when a thuraya in the sky inclined obliquely, like the oblique draping from shoulder to opposing waist of the folds of a sash, beaded with variegated gems. Ah, beautiful. But now look, this is different. Before we had, Thuraya greets you by the nose, and it looks kind of like a flagpole. Now, as the cluster is setting, it is in this kind of oblique shape or orientation, and it's thinner on the top left and thicker on the bottom right, just like a sash that is going over the shoulder and then going wide as it falls down to the right hip, or the opposite hip, whatever side it is. Okay, another one. It hung down low as if it were a cluster of grapes, right? And it looks like that. Here, the second one is even more specific. The star had sloped down as if it were a cluster of long, white mulahi grapes, specific type of grape. That's a white grape, fittingly. Another, I like this example. He traveled by night after a thuraya had sunk, after it appeared as if the sinking had separated a thuraya like a sieve. So it's thinner on top, and then as it goes down, it just separates out. Beautifully descriptive. These poets are describing a small cluster of stars in the sky that's prominent, but has many faint stars. And the more of those faint stars you can see, then the more descriptive you can be in this poetry. It's beautiful. And even this setting configuration here was referenced in the Quran as well, by the star when it goes down as it's setting. So another thing that happens then is that the star, it's so renowned, at some point it becomes anthropomorphized. a thuraya gets two arms with hands, sort of hands. One on the left is a short arm, and sometimes you see those faint stars near it referenced as a hand, but generally it's described as the amputated hand or arm. In Arabic, there are so many words. Some are incredibly specific and some are a bit less. So this word kef could be hand or sometimes forearm. On the other side, we have a much longer arm that goes to a five-fingered hand. And this is the W of Cassiopeia, five-fingered hand of a thuraya. And it was the henna-dyed hand because the second to last star is orange. And so it reflects the color of henna. And then all along the way on this long henna-dyed hand, all of the parts were articulated. The shoulder blade, the shoulder, the upper arm, the tip of the elbow itself, the pit of the elbow, the forearm, and then one of my favorites, the wrist. This here is the double cluster in Perseus. You can see this with the unaided eye as a particularly bright blotch in the Milky Way. Well, that was imagined to be the tattoo on the wrist of this henna-dyed hand of a thuraya. So now we are naming extended objects by naked eye in the sky, which of course you have to have dark skies for. It's beautiful. So then these two hands, we get to, we're going to go back a little bit. So thuraya itself would set in the morning in early November. But if we go to early October, then we get the two hands setting together into the horizon. And this beautiful piece of poetry says, "Won't Maya come in the night to one amorously mystified by her mention, when the hands of a thuraya reach for the western places of sunset." And that is so beautiful. This poet could have said, "Won't Maya come in the night to one amorously mystified by her mention in mid-October." But he didn't. Instead, he says, when the hands of Thuraya reach for the western places of sunset. That word, places of sunset, also demonstrates knowledge that the place where the sunset moves, not the zodiac, it's talking about the many places where the sun goes down. So from the equinoxes to the solstices and back, from summer to winter along the horizon, because those two hands take up a long length along the horizon. Okay. So I covered just the morning ones. I could go another hour, but maybe we'll do the evening apparitions of a thuraya for another talk here. But I hope this was helpful because we're starting with one star cluster and it has a shape to it. So as it moves across the sky, these poets are fully using the access they have to dark skies to talk about the changing aspect ratio and the shape and the relationship of the star cluster as time progresses through the year, all in the morning hours. So that's a lot of inspiration that our dark skies can generate. And this is one of the things that we're fighting for when we protect our night skies. So I will stop my screen share. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Danielle.
Oh, thank you. Gosh.
Yeah.
That was fun.
It's interesting to me that a lot of these, you are referring to written records of various kinds, prose and poetry, the Quran. A lot of cultures, though, they intentionally don't have written records. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
They have only oral traditions, and It's not like something's missing. Like they didn't figure out how to write. They intentionally stay with oral traditions, and that makes it even harder when dark skies are lost because the anchor,
Yep.
the only written, so to speak, record that you have, is looking up at the sky.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I have all of these records, and they're coming from oral traditions, the poetry, the prose. It was all memorized. There was no written Arabic script until about 50 years after the Quran started being um, um, recited because due to the different dialects of Arabic, there was a need to standardize the words of a religious text, which makes a lot of sense. And so that's when you see the development of the Arabic script. Um, but before that, it's all just being memorized. And so I'm lucky though, because uh, since even this old poetry uh, where the poet died well before Arabic was written, those poems were memorized, and so they were written down when writing was developed. And I have colleagues who study cultural astronomy among people who don't have writing, and it's all oral. And yeah, that is at risk when those places lose access to a dark, star-filled sky.
Danielle, what made this constellation so special with all the other constellations in the sky? Or did Arabs have other constellations that were prominent too?
Oh yeah, they had many, many named stars and constellations. Uh, a ton of the stars we use today, the IAU star names, come from Arabic.
Hmm.
Uh, 40%, I think, is the number.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, so there are many ones. The Pleiades actually are prominent across many different cultures across time. And part of it is they're so distinctive. I was doing a stargazing night at High Country Motor Lodge on Sunday night, and um, the Pleiades right now are nice and high in the sky after sunset, approaching that culmination point. And a couple different people came up and said, "Oh, is that the Little Dipper?" So they're identifying in that star cluster that distinctive shape, right? And of course, it's not the Little Dipper; it's similar, but it's really a distinctive shape. And if we go back to pristine desert skies with zero light pollution whatsoever, those stars really pop, and it's a completely obvious shape. Another element is that the Pleiades is just a little bit north of the celestial equator and the ecliptic. So, you have, Venus and Jupiter and the moon all encountering the Pleiades.
Well, I
And
think
so,
1,500 years ago, there were plenty of dark skies out there, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
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 Yep.